There is a stage in a man's life when almost nobody knows he is changing. He does not announce it. He does not post a dramatic message about becoming a different person. He does not call everyone who underestimated him and explain what they are about to witness. From the outside, his life may actually look quieter. Fewer appearances, fewer explanations, fewer people around him. Maybe he leaves work and goes straight home. Maybe he stops answering invitations he once accepted automatically. Maybe the phone stays face down while he sits alone at a kitchen table, looking at numbers, plans, unfinished work, or nothing at all. People can mistake this period for depression, defeat, bitterness, arrogance, or isolation. Sometimes it can be one of those things. But sometimes something very different is happening. A man is dismantling a version of himself that no longer works, and he is doing it without an audience. That is what makes rebuilding difficult to recognize. Destruction is usually visible. The relationship ends. The business fails. The money disappears. The opportunity collapses. Someone walks away. A mistake becomes public. A plan that seemed certain suddenly does not exist. Those moments attract attention, but reconstruction rarely does. Nobody sees the morning he wakes up and chooses not to repeat yesterday. Nobody applauds the evening he almost returns to an old habit and decides against it. Nobody witnesses the hundreds of ordinary decisions through which a man slowly becomes reliable to himself again. And that raises an important question. How can you tell when a man has truly begun rebuilding himself instead of simply disappearing from life? Because those two things can look surprisingly similar at first. Both can involve silence. Both can involve distance. Both can involve fewer friendships, fewer conversations, and long periods alone. But underneath the surface, they move in completely different directions. One shrinks a man's world. The other prepares him to return to it differently. And the final sign is usually where that difference becomes impossible to ignore. The first sign is that he stops explaining every decision he makes. There was probably a time when being understood mattered enormously to him. If someone questioned his career decision, he explained. If someone misunderstood his intentions, he defended himself. If friends thought he was making a mistake, he tried to convince them otherwise. If somebody underestimated him, something inside him wanted to prove them wrong. Not necessarily because he was weak. Being understood is deeply human. Your reputation affects your relationships, your opportunities, and your sense of belonging. But there is a point where constantly managing other people's perception becomes exhausting. Imagine a man who decides to start over professionally. Maybe he takes a less impressive job. Maybe he goes back to school. Maybe he starts building something on the side. Maybe his income temporarily drops while he learns a skill that could change his future. Someone asks him, almost casually, "So, this is what you're doing now?" There is something in the tone, not open hostility, just enough doubt to make the question sting. The old version of him might have given a 5-minute explanation. The plan, the numbers, the future. The reason this apparently strange decision actually makes sense. The rebuilding version often says something much shorter. "Yeah, for now," and continues. That change can be easy to misread. People may think he has become distant, secretive, even arrogant. But sometimes he has simply realized that a plan loses energy when too much of it is spent defending the plan. Psychologically, there is an important shift happening here. His source of evaluation is beginning to move inward. He still listens to intelligent criticism. He can still admit when he is wrong, but he becomes less dependent on immediate social approval before he can trust his own decisions. That distinction matters, because refusing all feedback is not strength. Sometimes it is defensiveness, wearing the clothes of confidence. A man who cannot tolerate disagreement has not necessarily developed self-belief. He may simply be protecting a fragile identity. Rebuilding looks different. He can hear your doubt without automatically borrowing it. He can receive advice without surrendering authorship of his life. He can say, "You may be right, I'll think about it," and actually think about it. What he no longer feels compelled to do is turn every decision into a courtroom. There is a strange freedom in that. Many men discover it only after something has gone badly enough to expose how little external approval can actually protect them. People can celebrate your relationship and still not be there when it falls apart. They can admire your salary and disappear when the job ends. They can praise your lifestyle while you quietly hate the life producing it. Eventually, a man can realize that being applauded for the wrong life is still the wrong life. So he grows quieter, not because he has nothing to say, because he has learned that some decisions need time before they need witnesses, and then another change begins. The second sign is that his life becomes almost painfully ordinary. This is one of the least glamorous parts of rebuilding. People imagine transformation through dramatic moments, a huge breakthrough, a sudden opportunity, a powerful realization at 2 in the morning. Those things can happen, but most reconstruction occurs through repetition. The alarm goes off. He gets up. He makes the bed. He walks. He trains. He goes to work. He studies. He cooks instead of spending money he does not have. He checks his account. He writes the plan. He goes to sleep earlier. Then he wakes up and does some version of it again. Nobody makes movies about the 73rd normal Tuesday. But that is where many lives are actually rebuilt. When a man's world has become unstable, routine can serve an important psychological function. It creates predictability, not perfect control, not certainty. Just enough structure for him to begin trusting himself again. Consider a man recovering from financial failure. The dramatic story might focus on the moment he lost everything. The call from the bank, the closed business, the embarrassment, the move into the smaller apartment. But his recovery might begin with something almost insulting in its simplicity. Opening a spreadsheet every Sunday, looking directly at numbers he used to avoid. Every week. Income, expenses, debt, savings, progress, no fantasy, no shame, just information. At first, the numbers remind him of what happened. Months later, the same ritual represents something else, responsibility. The situation may not be fixed yet, but he is no longer hiding from it. That is rebuilding. The same thing can happen physically. A man who has neglected himself for years begins walking every morning, not running marathons, not posting transformation photographs, walking, 30 minutes, rain sometimes, headphones sometimes, headphones sometimes. No headphones other days. Nothing dramatic happens on day 4 or day 19, but somewhere between the old version and the new version, something begins changing. He is keeping promises nobody else knows he made. And private promises are important because self-trust is built differently from public reputation. Reputation asks, do other people believe in me? Self-trust asks, when nobody is watching, do I believe my own word? That is a much harder question. A man can appear incredibly disciplined publicly while repeatedly disappointing himself privately, and he knows the difference. This is why rebuilding men sometimes become protective of seemingly boring routines. The morning gym session, the Sunday planning ritual, the evening reading, the meal preparation, the quiet hour after work. From the outside, these things can seem obsessive. Sometimes they can become obsessive. Any routine can become rigid enough to control rather than support a life. But healthy rebuilding uses structure as scaffolding. Scaffolding is not the building. Eventually, flexibility should return. Yet while the structure is still being rebuilt, those small routines may be holding more weight than anyone realizes. Because the goal is not really waking up at 6. The deeper goal is becoming a person who believes himself when he says, tomorrow I will begin. And this leads to the third sign. His circle may become smaller, but his relationships become more intentional. This is where people often misunderstand the silence. They notice he is around less. He stops appearing everywhere. The group chat that used to receive immediate replies now sits unanswered for hours. Friday nights become inconsistent. Some invitations get declined without an elaborate excuse. Certain friendships slowly become occasional rather than constant. People may say, he changed, and they are right. The harder question is whether the change is healthy, because when a man is rebuilding, he often starts noticing the emotional price of his environments. Not because everyone around him is toxic. That explanation is too convenient. Sometimes nobody did anything terrible. He simply begins noticing which relationships keep pulling him toward a version of himself he is trying to outgrow. There is the friend who only calls when the night is about to become reckless. The group where every ambition becomes a joke. The person who constantly reminds him of his worst years because their relationship depends on him staying that person. The conversation that always ends in gossip. The social ritual that consumes Saturday, ruins Sunday, and makes Monday harder. None of those things necessarily make the people involved bad. But compatibility can change when direction changes. Imagine trying to walk north while maintaining every commitment created when you were walking south. Eventually something tears. A rebuilding man often feels that tension before he knows how to explain it. So he creates distance. At first, awkwardly. He may feel guilty. He may wonder whether he is abandoning people. He may question whether growth has made him selfish. Sometimes it has. That possibility deserves to be admitted. People can use protecting my peace as an attractive excuse for avoiding accountability. They can label anyone who challenges them negative. They can disappear instead of communicating. They can turn boundaries into punishments. That is not necessarily growth. Healthy boundaries are not about eliminating everyone who causes discomfort. They are about becoming more deliberate about what you repeatedly expose yourself to. A real rebuilding process usually creates more discernment, not more contempt. He does not need to decide that his old friends are beneath him. He simply recognizes that history does not guarantee present compatibility. And sometimes the deepest change is even smaller than leaving a friendship. He stops discussing certain subjects with certain people. He understands that someone can be a good friend and still be the wrong person to ask about business. Someone can love him and still give terrible relationship advice. Someone can know his childhood and still know very little about the man he is trying to become. That realization is mature because it replaces all or nothing thinking. People do not have to be entirely good for you or entirely bad for you. Relationships can have limits. A man rebuilding himself begins recognizing those limits. And slowly, the question changes. Instead of asking, "Who likes me?" he begins asking, "Who helps me remain honest with myself?" Those are not always the same people. But something even more private is beginning underneath all of this. Because changing your routines and relationships is one thing, changing the way you respond when something hurts is harder. The fourth sign is that his reactions become less immediate. Watch carefully here, because silence can be deceptive. A man becoming quieter is not automatically becoming emotionally healthier. Suppression is quiet too. Resentment is quiet. Fear is quiet. Emotional shutdown can look incredibly composed from the outside. So the meaningful change is not simply that he reacts less. It is that there is increasingly more space between what happens to him and what he does next. Someone sends a disrespectful message. He reads it. The old impulse arrives. Reply now. Correct them. Make sure they understand. Win. He starts typing. Then stops. The phone goes down. An hour passes. Maybe the response eventually comes. Maybe it does not. But now there has been a decision. That pause is significant. Psychology often describes emotion regulation as the ability to influence how we experience and respond to emotion. It does not mean becoming emotionless. It does not mean tolerating mistreatment. And it certainly does not mean a man should swallow every feeling until his body carries what his mouth refuses to say. It means emotion is information without automatically becoming instruction. Anger says something matters. It does not tell you exactly what to do. Fear says something feels dangerous. It does not always mean danger is actually present. Jealousy can reveal insecurity, attachment, competition, or threatened values. It does not automatically prove betrayal. The rebuilding man gradually learns to investigate the feeling before obeying it. This can become visible in conflict. Someone criticizes him. Instead of instantly attacking the criticism, He asks himself something uncomfortable. Is any part of that true? That question requires more strength than a clever comeback. Because while a fragile ego needs either complete innocence or complete guilt, a developing identity can tolerate complexity. Maybe the other person said it badly. Maybe their intention was unfair. And maybe 10% of what they said still contains something he needs to hear. He learns to separate delivery from information. That skill changes relationships. It changes work. It changes parenting. It changes the way a man experiences failure. He stops treating every mistake as evidence that he is a failure. A project can fail without his entire identity failing. A woman can reject him without proving that he is unlovable. A friend can disagree without becoming an enemy. He can feel embarrassed without needing to disappear. He can feel angry without needing to destroy something. And perhaps most importantly, he can feel hurt without immediately turning the hurt into revenge. That does not happen because pain disappears. Sometimes the opposite is true. He finally lets himself experience feelings he spent years escaping. There may be nights when the rebuilding looks nothing like strength. He sits on the edge of his bed longer than usual. He remembers the relationship, the money, the mistake, his father, his younger self, the opportunity he wasted, the apology he never received, the apology he still needs to give. He realizes that rebuilding is not merely constructing a better future. Sometimes it means grieving the future that will never happen. That is why this stage can become dangerous if silence becomes the entire strategy. A man may tell everyone, "I'm good." He may actually believe it. But if good means he has simply stopped allowing anyone access to his emotional life, then the rebuilding has become a fortress. Fortresses are useful during attack. They are terrible places to live forever. Remember that distinction, because we are coming back to it. Before that happens, another sign begins showing up in an area that seems completely practical. The fifth sign is that he starts treating his resources differently. Money, time, energy, attention. His body. These are all forms of capital. And a man who has been forced to rebuild often becomes far more conscious of where they go. Maybe there was a period when earning more automatically meant spending more. A new car to prove he was progressing. A more expensive apartment because people were watching. Trips he could technically afford but never really recovered from. Clothes purchased for rooms where nobody actually cared. Or maybe money was not the problem. Maybe it was time. Every request received a yes. Every emergency became his emergency. Every relationship received unlimited access. Every notification could interrupt him. Every stranger on the internet was allowed to occupy mental space for free. Then something breaks, and suddenly he sees the cost. This is often where priorities become visible. He may start saving quietly. He may sell something, move somewhere cheaper, work a second job, cancel subscriptions, decline unnecessary expenses, spend money on a course instead of another weekend escape, take the overtime, or, in another version of rebuilding, finally stop sacrificing his entire life for overtime. Because rebuilding is not always about working more. Sometimes, a man has spent years using productivity to avoid himself. In that case, rebuilding might mean learning to go home, learning to sleep, learning to sit through an evening without needing to prove his worth through exhaustion. That is why surface behavior is not enough. Two men can work 12 hours a day for completely different psychological reasons. One is intentionally sacrificing for a limited period because he has a plan. The other is terrified that slowing down will force him to feel what he has been avoiding. Same schedule, different inner world. A man truly rebuilding himself becomes more interested in alignment than appearances. He starts asking better questions. What is this costing me? What is this buying me? Will I care about this in 3 years? Is this improving my actual life or merely improving how my life looks? That final question can change everything. A surprising amount of adult life is shaped by invisible audiences. People we want to impress. People we want to punish through success. Parents whose approval we are still chasing. Former partners we hope will eventually regret losing us. Friends we want to catch up with. Strangers we compare ourselves against. A man may believe he is building a future when he is actually constructing an argument. Look at me now. See what you lost. See what you doubted. See who became successful. Revenge can create enormous energy. So can shame. So can insecurity. But these are expensive fuels. They burn hot and keep the past in control. And this is where rebuilding begins, moving beyond discipline. Because eventually, the question is no longer whether he can become successful. The question is who all this success is for. That brings us to the sixth sign. He becomes willing to let an old identity die. This is one of the hardest parts, because people become attached not only to pleasant identities, they become attached to painful ones too. The victim, the provider, the failure, the funny one, the irresponsible one, the strong one, the betrayed one, the poor kid, the successful guy, the man nobody respects, the man everyone depends on. An identity gives experience a structure. Even a painful identity answers the question, who am I? And losing an answer can feel more frightening than keeping a bad one. Think about a man who has spent 10 years describing himself through what somebody did to him. She betrayed me. They fired me. My father abandoned us. My business partner ruined everything. My family never believed in me. Those experiences may be completely real. They may deserve anger. They may have altered his life. Rebuilding does not require pretending they did not happen. But eventually, a painful question appears. If this story stops being the center of my identity, who am I without it? That question is frightening because pain can become familiar territory. A man may know exactly how to behave as the betrayed person. He knows who the villain is. He knows why he is angry. He knows what must be proven. Healing removes some of that certainty. Now he has choices. And choices create responsibility. He cannot control what happened. But eventually he has to confront what happens next. This is where some men quietly begin rewriting their internal language. Not in a fake positive way. Not, everything happened for a reason. Some things are simply painful. Some losses remain losses. Some betrayals do not become blessings because enough time passes. The change is subtler. Instead of saying, my life was destroyed, he begins thinking, a part of my life ended. Instead of, I wasted 10 years, perhaps. I cannot recover those 10 years, but I can decide what the next 10 become. Instead of, I'm starting from nothing, he recognizes that experience, knowledge, mistakes, skills, and scars are not nothing. Language matters because the story a person repeatedly tells about an event influences what possibilities they can see afterward. Not magically. Reality still has consequences. Debt remains debt. A criminal mistake can have consequences. Divorce can alter finances, family structure, and trust. Failure can close doors. But interpretation affects whether those consequences become a chapter or an identity. The rebuilding man slowly learns the difference. And sometimes the identity he must release is not the broken version. It is the admired version. This can be even harder. Maybe he was always the successful one. The man with money. The athlete. The husband. The owner. The person everyone called for advice. Then life changes. The company fails. His body changes. The marriage ends. His status disappears. Suddenly, he walks into rooms where nobody knows who he used to be. That can feel brutal. Because when identity has been built around a role, losing the role can feel like losing the self. Rebuilding requires separating them. You had a business. You are not the business. You had money. You are not your bank balance. You were married. You are not only someone's husband. You failed publicly. You are not permanently the failure. And perhaps the most uncomfortable version, you succeeded once. You are not entitled to succeed again. You still have to become the person the next chapter requires. That realization creates humility. And humility may be one of the clearest signs that rebuilding is genuine. He talks less about what he used to be. He becomes more curious about what he still needs to learn. He stops needing every new person to understand his resume before respecting him. He can become a beginner again. That sounds small until you understand how painful beginnerhood can be to the adult ego. The former executive learning a new industry. The 40-year-old entering a classroom. The divorced father learning how to live alone. The man who once had employees delivering food at night while he rebuilds financially. The person who was once physically powerful starting again with 10 minutes on a treadmill. There is dignity in returning to the beginning without pretending it is the middle. And there is something else happening during this stage. He becomes less interested in proving that the old version deserved respect. He is too busy developing the new version, which brings us to the final sign. And this is the sign that separates rebuilding from hiding. The seventh sign is that his future begins mattering more than his audience. At the beginning, improvement may be fueled by other people. He wants someone to regret leaving. He wants his family to finally respect him. He wants friends to see that they were wrong. He imagines driving past someone in the car, walking into the room with the body, posting the result. Receiving the message. Hearing, "I always knew you could do it." There is nothing unusual about that fantasy. When people feel rejected, humiliated, or underestimated, social repair can become deeply motivating. But if rebuilding continues, something unexpected happens. The imaginary audience gets quieter. He stops checking whether she saw the post. He stops rehearsing the speech he will give the people who doubted him. He stops searching old names to measure his life against theirs. He stops needing someone else's disappointment to validate his progress. One evening, he catches himself working towards something and realizes he has not thought about proving anybody wrong for days, maybe weeks. The goal has become his. That is the turning point. Because now the future is no longer a weapon aimed at the past. It is simply a place he wants to live. This changes ambition. He may still want money, but he wants what the money can create more than what it can symbolize. Security, choice, time, a home, education for his children, freedom from constant emergency. He may still want a strong body, but the goal becomes being capable in his own life rather than winning an invisible competition with strangers. He may still want love, but instead of finding someone beautiful enough to make a former partner jealous, he becomes interested in whether the relationship is actually peaceful, reciprocal, and emotionally safe. His standards become less theatrical and more real. That is why a genuinely rebuilding man can sometimes appear less impressive for a while. He is removing unnecessary performance. He may wear simpler clothes, drive the older car, stay home more, speak less, post less, explain less. Not because ambition disappeared, because ambition stopped requiring constant evidence. There is a useful concept in psychology called self-efficacy. Broadly, a person's belief that they can organize and carry out actions needed to deal with situations. Self-efficacy is not empty confidence. It develops through experience. You attempt something, you survive difficulty, you adjust, you try again. Eventually your mind has evidence. A rebuilding man begins accumulating that evidence quietly. I can survive losing something. I can learn. I can be embarrassed and continue. I can be rejected and continue. I can admit I was wrong and continue. I can start again without knowing exactly how the story ends. That is a very different confidence from bravado. Bravado needs witnesses. Evidence does not. And now we can return to the question from the beginning. How can you tell whether a man is rebuilding himself in silence or simply withdrawing from life? Look at the direction of his silence. Is it producing greater capability or greater avoidance? Is his routine helping him re-enter life or helping him avoid uncertainty forever? Are his boundaries making his relationships healthier or making relationships impossible? Is he processing his emotions or merely burying them? Is his smaller circle more intentional Or is he gradually convincing himself that nobody can be trusted? Is he learning to stand without constant validation? Or has he become incapable of receiving feedback? Is his independence giving him freedom, or making support feel like humiliation? Those distinctions matter, because silence itself is not a virtue. Isolation is not automatically maturity. Working alone is not automatically discipline. Not responding is not automatically emotional control, and cutting people off is not automatically a boundary. Sometimes a man is rebuilding, sometimes a man is hiding, and sometimes he is doing both at the same time. Human change is rarely clean. A man can make incredible progress financially while becoming emotionally unavailable. He can become physically disciplined while remaining consumed by resentment. He can stop chasing approval while also becoming too proud to accept love. He can remove destructive friendships and accidentally remove everyone. That is why the real destination cannot simply be independence. The healthiest form of rebuilding eventually increases capacity. The capacity to work, to rest, to choose, to trust carefully, to admit mistakes, to tolerate uncertainty, to leave what harms him, and also to remain present when something good asks him to be vulnerable. That last part may be the hardest, because after life has hurt a man enough, control becomes seductive. Control your money, control your schedule, control your environment, control who gets close, control how much they know, control what you need, control what you feel. There is relief in that. For a while, it may even be necessary. But eventually, rebuilding asks for something control cannot provide. Participation. You have to risk caring again. You have to build something that could fail. Trust someone who could disappoint you. Apply for something that could reject you. Love without possessing certainty. Speak honestly without knowing how the conversation ends. Allow another human being to matter without handing them ownership of your identity. That is where rebuilding becomes life again. Maybe that is the quietest transformation of all. At first, a man thinks rebuilding means becoming impossible to hurt, so he strengthens everything. The finances, the body, the boundaries, the discipline, the mind. Then eventually he realizes the goal was never to become untouchable. Untouchable people cannot be wounded easily. But they cannot be reached easily either. A better goal is becoming someone who can be affected without being destroyed. Someone who can lose without becoming lost. Someone who can love without disappearing inside another person. Someone who can fail without interpreting failure as a final verdict. Someone who can ask for help without experiencing it as weakness. Someone who can succeed without needing success to humiliate anyone. That man may still be quiet. But the silence feels different. It is not heavy with things he is refusing to face. It contains concentration, direction, room. He no longer spends every evening negotiating with the ghosts of old decisions. He can remember without returning. He can regret without becoming regret. He can forgive without pretending the damage never happened. And he can move forward without requiring everybody from his past to understand why. People may eventually notice the visible results, the better job, the healthier body, the money, the calmer relationships, the new business, the confidence. And they may assume the transformation happened quickly. It rarely did. They are seeing the building. They did not see the scaffolding. They did not see him at the kitchen table when nobody knew what he was planning. They did not see the invitations he declined, the purchases he did not make, the messages he chose not to send, the mornings when motivation never arrived and routine had to carry him instead. They did not see him questioning an identity he had worn for 20 years. They did not see him become a beginner. They did not see the days when progress felt embarrassingly small. They did not see the moment revenge stopped motivating him. They did not see him realize that being misunderstood was sometimes cheaper than constantly abandoning himself to be understood. They saw the result. But rebuilding happened in the decisions that were too ordinary to photograph. And maybe that is why silence can become such an important season. Not because silence makes a man stronger, but because without constant commentary, there is finally space to discover which parts of his life were genuinely his, which goals were his, which beliefs were his, which relationships were real, which ambitions still mattered when nobody was watching, which wounds needed healing instead of displaying, which responsibilities needed accepting instead of explaining, and which version of himself needed to be thanked, then left behind. So if you recognize these signs in yourself, resist the temptation to turn rebuilding into another performance. You do not need to prove that you are transforming. Build the evidence. And if you recognize them in a man you care about, remember that silence alone tells you very little. Look at what the silence is producing. More honesty or more avoidance? More stability or more rigidity? More responsibility or more blame? More capacity for connection or less? The direction matters more than the appearance, because the man who is truly rebuilding himself is not slowly becoming someone who needs nobody. He is becoming someone who no longer needs another person to rescue him from himself. And because of that, eventually, he becomes capable of choosing people rather than desperately needing them or defensively rejecting them. That is a very different kind of strength. If one of these 7 signs describes a season you have lived through, share the one that changed you most. Not because rebuilding needs an audience, but because sometimes one honest sentence can remind another person that their quiet season is not necessarily an empty one. A man rarely rebuilds his entire life in one heroic moment. He rebuilds it in hundreds of private decisions, until one day, the life around him finally catches up with the man he has already become.